So again, thanks for joining us. We're hopefully going to get through this in about an hour and like 15 minutes. So yeah, we can start with, I don't know, Amy, if you want to share your screen or you want me to just read the conversation starter. Okay, perfect. So let me move this. So we're going to start with a conversation starter, and then you can throw your answers in that Q&A box, like I said earlier. So it said, what's taken care of in residence halls that you're going to have to handle, and have you talked this through with your roommates? So they can be pretty short answers. Just throw those in the Q&A box. Cleaning the bathrooms. Yeah, that's a big one. Trash and snow removal, lawn care, paying for utilities, mowing the lawn, lawn care, outside maintenance. Usually there are cleaning supplies provided and snow removal. Yeah, these are all good and common ones.
I have to say, Anna, I'm really glad to see snow removal. That is a great way for Tommies to be good neighbors and to not have people say, oh, there's the student rental.
I know that's a common thing people don't think they need to handle. But you know, it takes like 5 minutes to do, especially if it's not that much snow. Cleaning of main rooms and bathrooms, shared spaces, outdoor maintenance also included, cleaning bathrooms. Good. Those are all good answers. Any last ones? So I can just kind of sum up some of the main ones we saw where it was a lot of outdoor care, like shoveling, mowing the lawn, trash removal, cleaning inside, like bathrooms. Oh, there's a question raised. Okay, maybe I'll try allow to talk. Nick, do you have a question?
No.
Oh, your hand was raised. Okay, I'll mute
sorry.
you. No, that's all right. Yeah, so like it was okay. So lawn care, utilities you have to handle. It depends on your rental situation. Getting your own cleaning supplies, main rooms like bathrooms, living room. Yeah, so those are all good answers. Okay. Well, Amy, are we ready to get the PowerPoint going?
Yes, I think we are. So I would like to introduce our panelists, and we've got this in speaker view so you can get a good view of who is talking, and maybe I'll introduce each panelist and ask him or her to say a few words. First is the woman you were just seeing, Anna Smith, who is a senior, and Anna is in her second year as a neighborhood student advisor, co-captain of the track and field team, and a terrific collaborator, and I'm telling her she can't graduate because we don't want to lose her. Do you want to say a few words, Anna?
Yeah, so this is my, I guess, second time running STEP. We also put on STEP in February, and obviously that one was in person. So I'm excited to try this online and see how this goes. So far, so good. So yeah.
Next, I'd like to introduce the man who actually started STEP, the Student-Tenant Education Program. Josh Hengemule is an assistant dean at St. Thomas and is in charge of off-campus student life. So Josh, you want to say a few words?
Thanks for joining us tonight, folks. I know sitting and staring at the computer again is not probably your ideal way to spend an evening, though I'm glad we arranged to have the terrible weather today to make it slightly more appealing. And thanks for recognizing that this is important and valuable. And excited to talk more with all of you.
Just to confuse you, we'll now introduce another Josh. Josh Kerner is a student landlord. He can talk more about the properties he owns. Josh is also a 2018 graduate of St. Thomas, and I actually got to know him, I think you were a junior, Josh, and it was through a neighborhood leaf raking project. And I will just say Josh Kerner was a terrific collaborator in the work of neighborhood relations as a student and a student leader, and he's kind of my epitome of a good landlord. So Josh Kerner.
Hello, like Amy said, my name's Josh and I graduated in 2018. I was an entrepreneurship major and had an interest in real estate, was also a part of the student government at St. Thomas, which got me interested in doing something in the St. Thomas neighborhood in particular. And so yeah, I've been doing this for almost 2 years now. I've got a lot of tenants who have found some value in this program, and so I hope you guys find value in this program as well.
Thanks. And last but not at all least, I'm really happy to have Mike Vra back with us. Mike is an attorney at Homeline. He can talk with you about what that is. We did a version of this panel in person in February, and Mike, I just found your insights so valuable, and I know our students did too, so we'll let you meet Mike here.
Hi, everybody. Mike Vra, and I work at Homeline, which is a place where I run a tenant hotline, a statewide tenant hotline, where we take about 15,000 calls every year from renters all around Minnesota who have problems with their landlords and want to know what the rules are, and we help them wade through those. I've been doing this and nothing but this since about 1996.
All right, thanks to all of you. I think, forgive me a bit of housekeeping, step participants, but I've asked each panelist to unmute him or herself. So let's try just letting you jump in unless I call on one of you. The first topic that we're going to address, and again, we have another neighborhood student advisor here, Ariel Doer, who is going to be watching questions and making sure that I see your questions, because we very much, as Anna said, want this to be a back and forth. But let's start with the lease. And I'm just going to jump right into a timely topic, given that it's COVID-19. I am guessing that all of our participants here today have signed on for a lease that starts June 1. Mike, what advice might you have for students who are in a June 1 lease and are kind of unsure of plans for the fall?
It's not an easy question, actually, a June 1 lease. It's probably a binding contract between the tenants and the landlord. We're getting questions from students, not just at St. Thomas, but around the state, some starting in the fall where they've already signed a lease for the fall, some for June, like you've mentioned. And the short answer is I think it's probably a binding contract, honestly, whether school is in person or not. There are some pretty complicated legal arguments that a tenant could get out of the lease if they aren't able to go back to school. But none of them have been tried since probably World War II. And even then they weren't especially successful for renters. I don't have to tell anybody here that the world is different than it was 6 weeks ago. But in my line of work, landlord-tenant relations in Minnesota, everything's radically different. But like I said, I think most students that have signed a lease for the next academic year are at this point probably locked into that contract.
Josh Kerner, anything you'd like to add as a landlord of what, 5 properties? Do I have that right?
Yep. Yeah, so I would add a couple things. One, if you have major concerns about being locked into the lease starting in June, and you haven't reached out to your landlord yet, I would say reach out to them and see if you can work out a plan. If you absolutely can't, for some reason, start that lease, you can see if they would be willing to look for new tenants. And in the meantime, you're probably still going to be, they're not going to make the contract void, or they're not going to, I'm not sure what the term is, cancel the contract or anything like that. But if you work with them and maybe helping them finding new tenants, that could be one solution to getting out of the lease. The other thing I would say is, just ask. There's nothing wrong in asking a landlord for a plan, a future financial plan. If because of the situation you can't make payments come June 1 or July 1, see if there's some grace to be given from your landlord. Other than that, besides just communicating with them, I don't have much more to say about it.
Josh or Anna, anything you want to add on this point? Okay. I think this is a good segue into our next topic, which is tenant responsibilities, and I'll get the PowerPoint slide up here in a minute. But I think, Josh Kerner, what I hear in your answer is get to know your landlord. So I'm going to put up here, if we were in person, here's what you would be seeing. So these are some of the tenant responsibilities that we came up with. I mean, you can see these, obviously, to pay rent and utilities on time, keep the unit in good condition. We can go through and define some of these. Be a good neighbor, that's the heart of my work in neighborhood relations. And I hope you will all start using the Q&A function here and, ask us some specific questions, please, about what these mean. But Josh Hengemule, I wonder if you might just dive into this. What do you feel is most important for our students to understand about being tenants?
I think that it comes with a real responsibility, right? And not that a lot of other things in your life don't, but I'll compare it to if you've been living on campus in the past and the bill gets charged to the same place where the student account comes and tuition goes, and then so paying it is, you can talk to the people a little bit more easily, or everyone at St. Thomas is interested in helping you, or it's easier for your folks to help you with those costs, whatever it might be, right? On the first of every month, or whatever the date is your landlord sets, that rent is going to come due, and it's going to be your responsibility to take care of it. And so it will take a little bit more engagement and a little bit more staying on top of things. I can't even remember what day of the week it is right now, let alone what date of the month it is. So paying rent right now would probably be challenging for a lot of folks. But I know once you get in the busyness of a semester, that sometimes happens too. And so whatever you need to do to set yourself reminders, because penalties can come quickly if you aren't paying that rent and paying it on time. And that is the primary responsibility of a tenant.
Anna, I met you when it was the summer before your sophomore year. I think you were brand new in a house, you were brand new in a lease that had started June 1. What was the biggest surprise for you in being a tenant who had never lived on her own before?
I think the biggest thing for me was the utilities part was, we have to take care of Wi-Fi, water, electricity, and things like that. When before, like in the dorms, you could just leave the light on or things like that. Where now, when you're in the house, you're like, I'm paying for electricity, so be mindful of that. Or especially heating in the winter, the warmer you want it, the more expensive it's going to be. So kind of also just paying those on time each month and being like, we need to do this. And also I think budgeting too was now you have to set aside money for rent and utilities and things like that. So that's a big adjustment from living on campus to moving off campus.
And again, I'm just going to do multiple plugs. Please type your questions into the Q&A so we can make this a dialogue. Mike, I wonder if you could jump in on this. Our second bullet point, keep the unit in good condition and notify your landlord of any problems. What is typically required of a tenant in terms of keeping the unit in good condition?
It's not something that's explicitly written in the law, that kind of thing, but it's sort of, you know it when you see it, kind of an issue. What I always tell tenants is you're going to be responsible for cleaning your own space, right? Your room. You're going to share a kitchen and a bathroom with a bunch of other roommates, and you've got to figure out how to manage that cleaning mountain sometimes it can turn into. And it can be a negotiated thing. I honestly think roommate relations are incredibly important when you get your first rental on your own. And so keeping communication lines open with the landlord is great, but also with the roommates so everybody understands what everybody's responsible for. For instance, if you all have 1/4 of the utility payment, but only one person is paying it, then one person turns into the evil utility collector at the end of each month. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to have to harass people for the money. They'd rather just get the money and go pay the bill. And so it's those dynamics that have to be worked through. But repairs with the landlord, you just want to tell the landlord about repair problems. Most landlords fix things as soon as you let them know, whether it's a text or an email. Doesn't have to be mean, no all caps, right? No yelling on paper or in text. Just politely say, this is the problem, hoping you could come over and have a look at it pretty quickly. And most landlords do.
Josh Kerner, I wonder if you could talk about how you try to establish relationships with your tenants. I'm guessing it helps that you're pretty close to a peer. You're just a couple of years out of college, but what steps do you take to try to get to know them, have them get to know you so there is good rapport when there are problems?
Yeah, I guess I don't really try to look at it as anything other than we're really a team kind of thing, because I have things that I care about, like my tenants being, good citizens, and also, keeping these homes in good condition. But, I'm always hesitant to say, keep my home in good condition because you're renting it from me. This is your home right now. And so I like to tell them that we're a team, and I like to just be as not demanding as possible. But I guess I see my tenants as friends. I talk to them about other things besides just our relationship, in the contract. And I call them frequently to check in and make sure that they're shoveling and make sure that they know what their responsibilities are, and then ask to see how they're doing. So I guess I really just encourage them to, they know that they could call me anytime.
We have a good timely question, and I'll just use first name from Audrey. And Audrey, thank you. This is not one I would have thought of. She is asking, do you think landlords will do a deep clean of houses before the June 1 move-in? Is that something that can be negotiated due to COVID-19 and the uncertainty of how the current residents are practicing social distancing? What a good question, panelists. I'm just going to let one of you jump in.
Personally, I think it's an expectation that my tenants have, that their home is spotless when they move in. So I just try to take care of that every year, regardless of the situation. So I would say, yeah, for sure.
Josh or Mike, would you recommend that students make this a specific ask? Given that the peak of COVID may be not that long before they move in Minnesota. I mean, how would you recommend our students handle this in such an unusual time?
I think it's, from a legal perspective, it's probably too late. It's something you have to negotiate before you sign the contract, which most people couldn't have done because they signed their contract quite a while ago. But you're a customer. A tenant is a customer, and it's fair to say, hey, landlord, business owner, as a paying customer, I want this as part of what I'm paying for. And because of the world we're in, I need that assurance that it's been cleaned. That being said, I can't imagine many tenants would move in and their first act wouldn't be to wipe down all the commonly touched areas on June 1. You know, all the light switches, all the door handles. Even if the landlord said it was cleaned, I can't see many people moving in, because I'm talking to people that are moving in 3 days, May 1st. Every first of the month is when people move in throughout the state. And I know college areas have 2 times of the year where they tend to move in and move out. But a lot of other people are going to be moving this week, and pretty much everybody's going to be trying to do whatever they can to disinfect the place, hoping the landlord has done everything they could to sanitize it, but they're going to try to sanitize it as well as they can when they move in as well.
Josh, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll say one thing. If you know, if you're moving into a dirty home, it could affect that condition report that you sign when you're moving in. So it's wise to, when you're moving in, walk through the home with your landlord and check down all the things, you know, that are wrong with the place in terms of, you know, maintenance and, for example, dings on the wall or scratches on the floor. And you know, if there's one, stuff all over the place, that's hard to accomplish, and 2, if it's fairly clean, you know, it's really easy to do that condition report. So again, I just think that it's something you should really encourage your landlord to have done. If you're moving into a home, it should be clean, or else that condition report could be skewed a little bit.
I'd go a little further if I could on that, Amy. The
Please.
condition report is fine, but photos are the best. Photos of any problems with the place when you move in are the most essential thing when trying to get the security deposit back at the end of the lease. And so as a tenant moving into your first place, this might be the most important thing I would say all night, is take photos of the conditions that you're seeing that are a problem, and have those in case you need them when you move out. But it's COVID-19 is invisible stuff, so it's hard to get a picture of that sort of problem.
So I have screen shared a slide from a step, as I think you may know, is normally a 2-part event over 2 different convo hours. And we sent you day 1, but we're going to be going back and forth a little bit tonight. The screen that you are seeing, the moving in screen, is actually from day 1. And so I just want to keep this up for a minute. And given that June 1st is going to be here fairly quickly, you know, invite participants to send us any questions in the Q&A on anything you're seeing on this screen. Our next topic, and I'll screen share in a minute, is landlord responsibilities. In addition to Josh Kerner, I believe we have one landlord in the audience, and I invited other landlords to take part. Mike, from a legal point of view, anything in particular that you want to call out here?
Yeah, this is something that we wouldn't have talked about in February, to be sure, which is the issue of privacy right now. Staying with the COVID-19 theme, a landlord has a key to your home almost every time. It's 1 out of every 1,000 landlords doesn't have a key to the place, and that's just because they don't know what they're doing as a landlord. Every landlord has a key to a place. And so tenants right now, as you might imagine, are incredibly concerned about when can the landlord enter, under what conditions can they enter. And the rules haven't really changed on that, on when a landlord can actually enter the rental unit. They need a reasonable business purpose, and they have to try to give reasonable notice. But the statute that I'm basing this answer off of also has a clause in it that says that it is hinging on under the circumstances, which has, I've done this again since 1996, and that part of the statute has never meant anything important, but right now it means a lot because the circumstances are so radically different. So if you ask the landlord to come in to fix something, chances are you want it fixed and you're okay with the landlord coming in. But if you're moving out at the end of this month and the landlord wants to show it to a prospective new tenant, we're getting a lot of calls about how that can be done, whether the landlord can actually more or less force their way in, or can the tenant stop them from coming in. And so it's a really complicated issue that's become a big deal for a lot of tenants.
Mike, I'm going to ask you a question that I know we always get. You use the phrase reasonable.
Mhm.
The law doesn't define reasonable, I'm assuming, but maybe there's expertise you can bring into what students might be fair to expect about what that notice might be.
You mean how much notice? Is that what you're asking? Right. Yeah, the law doesn't say it in a lot of other states, and the laws that I'm talking about are almost all Minnesota laws. It's not federal laws. It's not city laws. Minnesota laws are the things that matter the most. And that's true in every state. In many other states, they actually name the number of hours the landlord has to warn you before they come in, 24, some states even have 48 hours. Minnesota just has this really vague, reasonable notice rule. And so that probably means overnight. Anything short of that is probably not enough, but it doesn't mean 24 hours, a standard, set your time piece day. And so it's an unfortunately vague thing. I wish it would change, but that's the rule we have.
I will say, I want to bring Anna into this discussion, but I will just say that I've had probably 3 different complaints this academic year. And in each case, it has been by female Tommies, by women in the neighborhood who are just uncomfortable with a maintenance man, and it always has been a man, showing up at their door, in some cases almost unannounced. And do I have to let them in? I'm not sure this is safe. I am home alone. Anna, I wanted to come back with you on the earlier topic, but do you have any advice for, female students, especially on that topic, as someone who's lived in the neighborhood?
I would say if you're uncomfortable being alone, make sure either one of your roommates can be home, or say someone like a friend, a boyfriend, girlfriend, someone else there with you in case you're uncomfortable with someone being there. I personally, usually there's always like more than just me home if someone comes. But I usually make sure of that too, just because you never know. But yeah, make sure someone else, either roommate, a friend, someone else is there with you.
This is also a good chance for me to plug off-campus student life. That's kind of the umbrella that we're under, neighborhood relations, which is very much my wing of the institution, and especially the 4 neighborhood student advisors. Anna's one of them, who collaborate with me. Unfortunately, the other 3 are part of this meeting, but you can't see them. Ariel Dewar, who will come back next year, Connor Kratzky, who will also come back next year, and Nick Pollock, who will come back next year. And we hope to add a 4th. When you run into situations like this where you're uncomfortable, reach out to us. I mean, that is why we are here. And St. Thomas is, if not unique, I would say pretty unusual in devoting the resources that we do to neighborhood relations and off-campus students. So please take advantage of that. Anna, I did want to ask, these very good questions about COVID. Have you reached out to your landlord, you and your roommates, since all this started, the sheltering in place? Is anything different with you and your landlord now that you're pretty much there all the time?
Nothing is really different. None of us really asked for like a rent break or anything. I think just because all of us are moving out end of May, so we're like, you know what, we'll just go with it. And all of us who do have on-campus jobs are still getting paid. So none of us have really hit like a hit like that. Other than that, nothing really with all the COVID stuff. It's kind of the same relationship we've had with our landlord. And we've been talking to him more since we're planning on moving out soon, but everything's kind of stayed the same.
Although this slide that you're seeing is addressed to landlords, I would, the Tommies, the students in this meeting, I would like to call your attention to the 4th bullet point. We're saying to the landlords, do not condone over-occupancy. This might be a good chance to talk about over-occupancy. We have the benefit of being in a neighborhood with beautiful old historic houses, and those are often very large houses, and they sometimes have more than 4 legal bedrooms. We want to make sure you understand that citywide, the legal limit for occupancy is 4 unrelated adults. And that's a really confusing statement because it actually does include siblings unless a parent or a grandparent lives with you. So there are many students who do overoccupy. There are many students who get away with overoccupying, but we strongly encourage you not to do it, not to risk eviction, and actually not to risk your landlord's status as someone who can legally rent to students. I wonder if anyone else wants to address overoccupancy, any other panelists?
Just real quick, from the business perspective of the landlords in this neighborhood, yeah, they have a student rental license that allows them to rent to students, St. Thomas students, in this, confined space from Fairview over to the river and from, I think it's 94 all the way to St. Clair. And if you sign a lease with 4 names on it and it's got 6 bedrooms and you say to your buddies, hey, come live with us and let's knock down the rent a little bit. If you hide that from your landlord and you get caught, you've got a mess on your hands. Now the landlord has to prove that they had no idea that that was going on. And that can be a really tricky situation. And, let's say they did know what was going on, but they only have, 4 people on that lease. They can say that they had no idea about it, and students will still be kicked out of that home, and you will still be stuck finding a place to live. And that's just a situation you want to completely avoid. But also, it could ruin your landlord's business strategy for that home, which is that's no good either.
Could I jump in on that?
Please.
Because I appreciate Josh saying kind of the effect on the landlord, but the effect on the tenant is they're likely to have an eviction filed against them. And just so we're clear, that's in the metro area, in Minneapolis, St. Paul, having an eviction on your record is probably worse than having a felony conviction on your record when you're trying to get rental housing. Landlords look at evictions first, because how have you treated other landlords in the past is the question they're asking themselves when they do background checks. So you don't want to have an eviction on your record for over occupancy, which is likely to have an impact for, as the law stands right now, 7 years. And so over occupancy is a giant risk. It's the second most common reason evictions are filed in Minnesota. Landlords care about it because in general, they don't know who it is. They haven't done the background check to figure out who's renting there. So they do file evictions for the boyfriend or girlfriend or any friend moving in.
We have a couple questions from the gallery. Thank you. This is an anonymous attendee. How long can I have a friend or significant other living with me, or does it depend on the lease? So I think what this person is asking is, I'm going to live in a place that's fully occupied with 4, but there might be circumstances where a friend or significant other has to move in. I actually ran into a case like this just a week ago. A young man is over-occupying a house right near me. Well, his roommate got sick and they think it's probably COVID. So, there's a good reason if ever there was one to bend the law. But would anyone like to address this? How long can I have a friend or significant other? I think this is a couch surfing question before it becomes a problem.
This does depend on the lease substantially. So you'd want to look at the lease, and most things that we see in leases say something like you can't have somebody stay more than 10 nights in a year or 14 nights in a year or 72 consecutive hours, something like that. And if you go past that in your lease, you can be evicted for it. The other sort of general question though is they can't live there, which is another vague kind of concept. And what tends to win a case for a tenant if the landlord says you've got somebody living with you that's not supposed to be, is if you can prove they have the right to live somewhere else. So if they have a lease somewhere else and it's not with their mom, then it'll probably deter the landlord from taking any action. But if not, and they think that somebody's living there, all their stuff is there, they've got a key to your place, they're getting mail there, at some point they're living there. You don't have to have a press conference where you announce that somebody's moved in with you. It's just, you know, a judge can declare sort of, if it comes to it, that they are living there. But look at the lease first.
Anna, I wonder if you could talk about this in terms of, you know, how would this affect you as a roommate? You know, in part one, we actually talked a lot about roommate relationships. Let's focus on that a little bit tonight. What if you had, you know, someone's boyfriend couch surfing for 3 weeks?
I know we definitely, my roommates and I let each other know if we're having people over, even if it's just for a night. And we just discuss like boyfriends, like how long they can be over, especially since now we're all working from home and it's like we don't have that big of a space. Like we kind of limited when they can come over, maybe if it's just like and during nights, because during the day we're all trying to do schoolwork. But even then, like we try to make this our space and kind of keep it that way. So we for sure give each other heads up if we're having people over, and that's kind of just the courteous thing to do as a roommate.
Anna,
So-
I don't mean to pry, Anna, but are people still having boyfriends over right now at this time in history?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I can answer that too, yes. I wonder if either of the Joshes would like to, just staying on this topic for a minute, if someone has to do this for whatever reason, would you recommend notifying the landlord? Is this a seek forgiveness rather than permission?
I am not going to tell someone to seek forgiveness rather than permission if it comes to breaking the law, and could cost the landlord their ability to rent, right? The city's going to follow the letter of the law for the most part. And so I think the trick is to try to find other opportunities. I want to revisit something too. Mike talked about the possibility of eviction if you over-occupy. I also want to talk about that middle situation where there's only 4 people on the lease, but the 4 people on lease say, well, our 2 buddies will live there and we'll split the rent 6 ways and that'll be great. Well, if the landlord doesn't file to evict you, or if there isn't that major thing, he or she is going to make sure those other 2 that aren't on the lease are out and not living there anymore. And those 4 of you that are on the lease are now responsible for the total rent, not just the 6 that you were before. And so it may seem in the short run that you're saving some money, and you know, if you don't get caught, you might, but as Mike said, there's some major consequences as it relates to eviction. There's some still pretty significant consequences, even if you don't get evicted, that I want to make sure to point out. And that's another reason I would say, I mean, you could talk to the landlord, but I don't see a lot of landlords saying, sure, let your buddy move in temporarily and over-occupy and risk my license to rent to you, when he could maybe go home, or maybe could you stay with your parents and sublet your place in your house to him, or those kind of situations. There's a lot of legal ways to work these kind of things out in that kind of situation. And I think that's going to be the way to look at it first.
We have on another topic, we have a good question from Natalie. Could you speak on the importance of renter's insurance and what protection it gives? Who would like to dive into this? Renter's insurance.
I can start, and then if Josh or Mike or Anna have anything to add, I'd be happy to let them. Renter's insurance covers your belongings in the property, right? You think about what your parents' homeowner insurance might cover. It covers the property and the belongings. You, because you don't own the property you're renting, don't need to cover the property. You just need to cover your belongings. And 9 times out of 10, renter's insurance then is really inexpensive and really affordable. And it might not seem like you have anything that's that valuable, but if you think about your computers, your clothes, the electronics you have, the big TV, the gaming system, whatever you might have in the property, it adds up kind of quickly. And I really want to point that out, especially in situations where, let alone if you have roommates and one of them burns a pizza and it creates a fire and smoke damage in the house, or especially if you're living in a duplex or a multi-unit building of any kind. One unit can bring an entire building down, right? And so, or at least cause damage to an entire building. And so there's a lot of opportunity, there's a lot of risk that more often than not doesn't come to fruition, right? The vast majority of people who purchase any kind of insurance don't end well. maybe not health, but the other kinds of insurance don't end up needing it, right? Renter's insurance, homeowner's insurance, you probably won't need it, but gosh, for those situations where you do, and we have worked with students who have dealt with theft, dealt with fire, dealt with smoke damage, dealt with water damage. It's really, really valuable. And sometimes it's worth looking if your parents do own their home and have homeowners insurance. There are a lot of homeowners policies that will extend to a rental property and just cover the belongings in that rental property. It's worth working with your folks and that insurance agent to see if that's a possibility. We're talking, what, Mike, I know you do this more, a lot, like $10 a month can sometimes be plenty to cover renter's insurance.
Yeah, it might be that low, especially if you happen to have car insurance and you can get a multi-policy discount with your same insurer. It can be, I've actually known people that their entire insurance bill went down when they got the second policy because the second policy discount lowers it that much. And again, it's for your stuff. It's for a fire. It's for if you get robbed. That's really what it's for. And there was a question that came up following up on this. If something gets stolen, how do you prove what it was? Photos, right? You keep photos of anything really valuable. And I mean, these days, everybody stores everything in some atmospheric place, I guess. And so you can access those pictures if you have the serial number. Receipts can matter, or if you don't have a receipt, if you bought a computer at Best Buy, you can probably contact Best Buy if it's been in the last year, and they'll generate a new one to you or email a new one to you. So there's ways to prove what you had.
So Mike, if I'm hearing you right, the advice to our students who will be moving in June is don't just document the condition of the property, document the valuables you are bringing into it as well.
Mike?
I'm sorry. Yes, I hit the wrong button. Yeah. Oh, it's fun to watch old people run computers. Yes. Yeah, no, you definitely would want to take a few minutes to document the valuable stuff. And even clothes, like Josh mentioned, can add up to a lot of money. And if you have, obvious designer brand clothing, you'd want to have evidence of that, or shoes. Again, you don't think you have a lot of stuff. I was in college once, but you have stuff and it's got a real value to it. To replace it if you had to.
When we were in college, Mike, we weren't bringing computers and iPods and all of that kind of stuff too.
Josh Kerner, do you have anything in your lease related to renter's insurance, or do you at least have conversations with your tenants about it?
Yeah, it's in my lease. I just have a little part that says it's recommended that you get renter's insurance. And a friend of mine who also helps me manage my properties is an insurance agent at the State Farm right next to the violin shop and the subway and all those other things on Grand Avenue and Fairview. So I try to plug him in for a lot of my tenants. And I think a couple of them actually use him for renter's insurance.
Good plug. And of course, I will say it's right by the Grandview, one of my favorite places, and I'm really missing it. I'm going to screen share here, moving on to city codes. And Anna, I wonder if you might start, once we look at this, just talking about which of these you feel is most important for students to pay attention to. Just a sec here, please. We talked about over-occupancy, but any others that you think students should really pay attention to?
Yeah, I'll just say one quick thing again about over-occupancy. That actually did happen to me sophomore year. So you might not think it'll happen to you, but it did. Kind of what everyone was saying. There was 6 of us. There were 6 bedrooms, and only 4 of us were on the lease. And I was luckily one of the ones on the lease, but we got caught for over-occupancy. And we never thought it would happen. So it does happen. And
can I just say, though, it's how Anna and I met and I hired her.
Yep, that is true. That is the story of how we met. Also, snow removal. That's actually a big one, especially during the winter months. Especially, I think I talked about snow emergencies in the PowerPoint that I sent out. And it's a big deal when those are declared to move your cars. And there also could get towed. I've gotten tickets for parking on the wrong side. And I think I mentioned also there's an easy app I think it's called like snow removal. So it tells you when one's declared, what sides of the street you can park on. Yeah, I guess if like Josh wants to talk about like the social hosts and noise and stuff like that, that one's also important.
Sure, social host, if it doesn't matter what your age is, if there's someone who's under the age of 21 on your property with alcohol in their system when the police arrive, you can be cited as a social host. They don't have to approve in that you provided that alcohol. Maximum penalties are up to 90 days in jail and a $1,000 fine. Thank God Amy and I have never worked with a student who's gotten that, but we have worked with students who have gotten a social host citation. And even when they get this diversion program, it's still hundreds of dollars, a lot of time. Normally you're on probation for a year as well. There's a lot to it that is not fun, is the short version of it. And so you don't even have to have invited the guest in. One of the things I always joke about, or not joke about, I tell, lock your doors. Lock your doors even when you're inviting friends over, even when you are a 21-year-old junior having people over and having a small gathering with alcohol, not a party, no one has parties, but a gathering, having people over, so that no one's coming in who you don't invite into your property. And then because some of you on this call are or were the first years running around the neighborhood looking for the house that has people in it that you can walk into. Once you're the homeowner or the tenant, you don't want to have those people walking into your house because it's going to create trouble for you. And so if you lock your doors, you control who comes in and who doesn't. And that can help you avoid those kind of social host situations. Noise, there's a formal code about 10 p.m. You shouldn't be making loud noises after 10 p.m. Loud noise, I think, in the code, or at least in something I read from the city, is described as if you think about a lawnmower out on the front yard, like if you shouldn't be doing lawn work at 10 p.m., you shouldn't be having a bunch of people out on your property after 10 p.m. making that level of noise. And you'd be surprised to how little noise that actually is. And so we do recommend, especially when it's nicer weather and people are outside, people are paying attention to that noise. Even if you're inside and the windows are open, having someone go outside every once in a while, walk around, maybe walk a house away if it's nice enough, and hear if you can hear the noise, because those things matter. And as Amy mentioned, we're in a neighborhood with some older houses. A lot of them don't have central air. When it's nice out, people have their windows open and noise can travel real far on a quiet night. And nothing will get the police to your door quicker than noise that's waking people up.
The other thing to consider with noise, I can't see you and ask you to raise your hands at this question, but think about where you were raised. And I find, at least in doing STEP, we find that the majority of our students were not necessarily raised in a city, right in the heart of a city, but that is where you're living now, and houses are closer together than you might be used to. And so noise really travels. Anything else on this list, Mike, that you would like to address?
Well, I think the noise really does matter a lot. My starting advice with noise is something that I'm sure you'd encourage, Amy, which is get to know your neighbors so well that they have your cell phone number so they can text you if it's loud, or they can send you a quick email or a call and say, it's really loud, can you turn it down at night at 10:30, versus having them call the police or the landlord. You'll never get evicted for noise unless somebody complains about the noise. And if they complain to you instead of to the landlord or the police, there's not going to be an eviction. And if they call you at 10:30 or send you a text at 10:30, don't, yell back at them when they do that. But having a relationship with your neighbors where they're comfortable talking to you enough to say, hey, it's really loud at night, and giving them your phone number so they can text you is really the only way in our modern world where people are comfortable saying it's too noisy. Nobody wants to knock on your door at 1 a.m. saying, please be quiet. They're okay sending you a text though. And so that's a way to keep the police or the landlord from going to file an eviction.
And, the guys in this meeting might just roll their eyes at this, but it does seem to be the case that a lot of middle-aged women, and I'm of which I am, are really intimidated about talking to college-aged men, especially if there's alcohol and especially if it's a party. I mean, I don't feel that way, but it happens time and again where Tommy men will say to me, why didn't they just come to me? Why did they involve you in it? And sometimes it's because they're intimidated to talk to you. And that's more about them than you, but it is a reality. Josh Kerner, I wonder if you could talk, looking toward the bottom of this list, as a landlord about smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. I mean, a really boring topic, but pretty essential.
Yeah, in my lease, I make sure that the students know they're in charge of maintaining the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. So, if you hear that beep going off and you're trying to sleep, you can just pull the thing out of the wall and leave it there and forget about it. And that's a really bad idea, especially if you're in charge. So make sure you're changing out the batteries, not just taking the batteries out and hoping that the thing shuts up. But also I have a couple more things on those bullet points. One, I guess with the noise, quick tidbit, turn off your subwoofer if you're having people over after 10 and you're inside, because you might not be able to hear the music outside, but you could definitely feel it if you've got the subwoofer going. So there's one. And then with the certificate of occupancy, you're going to have inspectors stopping by once in a while, even if no one called the city or anything, and they're there to do yearly or bi-yearly, or sometimes they only come every 6 years to inspect the place and make sure that all the codes, that everything's still meeting code. And if it's not, they have to let the landlord know. And the homes are graded based on how well your home is meeting code. So let's say you want to put a fireplace in the front yard, and you don't tell your landlord about it, and it's less than 15 feet away from your home. Well, that's actually gonna affect that inspection and the grade of your property. And so, when you're doing things like adding a fireplace in the front yard, or even putting outlet extenders in your outlets, or the things where you'll plug it into an outlet and then it makes 3 extra outlets.
Surge protector?
Yes, one of those. There are certain things that you can do to a place that might seem like a no big deal, but if an inspector comes and inspects the place, it actually does affect the grade of your property and other things. So something to keep in mind.
Good question from an anonymous attendee, and Josh, maybe we'll just stick with you for a minute. Josh Kerner, will they notify you, they being the city, will the city notify you, the Department of Safety and Inspections, before they come to inspect?
So I've had different experiences with it. Normally I get a notification a month in advance. Sometimes that letter gets lost. Maybe it's delivered to the home directly, and then that letter isn't relayed on to me. Either way, they're still going to show up that day. So that's how they communicate. They send the letter out. I have gotten a couple calls, but I believe, it's pretty much a letter. Hey, this is the time. We expect you to be there. And that's how it goes. So
if I could jump in on that, inspectors come out in 2 ways. One is what Josh has just described, where they have an annual or every other year inspection that they have to do, and that they are supposed to tell the landlord, who's then supposed to tell the tenant when they're coming. The other type is complaint-driven inspections, where the tenant has asked the city to come out and look at something because they're concerned about it. And they don't have to tell the landlord they're coming out in advance of that, but they will send the landlord a copy of the report that they issue. For sure. Sometimes they do tell the landlord that they're coming, but they don't have to in that spot.
I'm glad, Josh Kerner, that you mentioned the grades. So Tommy's, your property can get an A, B, C, or D grade from the city. You can find that on the website, but it's really convoluted and hard to find. So when you get in your place, reach out to me or to one of the NSAs, and we can help you with that. I want to turn to a question, and this is Audrey again. Very good question. Should we be concerned with the increase of break-ins around campus from this spring carrying over to next fall? Is there a recommendation from the university as to how best protect ourselves from this problem? Josh Henkemuel, would you like to start?
Yeah, I would say It's hard to know. I think there has been a rise, but in a lot of those situations, the things that have helped have been knowing your neighbors who are keeping an eye on the community with you, locking doors, those kind of things. I can't commit as to what next fall will look like or not, and I wish I could, but we'll often tell people it gets real easy to think of the St. Thomas campus and even the quaint neighborhood around us as this small isolated community, but we live in a major metropolitan area, and so there is definitely going to be issues happening in St. Paul. There always are. I mean, you can look at crime statistics for the city of St. Paul, and sure, it's been an increase, but we're nowhere near some other areas in the city as well. And so I still feel a great deal of confidence that we live in a relatively safe neighborhood, and especially if students are taking good precautions, they're doing good work to protect themselves. Things like moving in groups, especially if you're walking alone, not walking with headphones and music playing, because you're not going to be hearing what's happening around you and those kind of things, right? I know that's counter everything that students do in this day and age, but I think that's an important thing to think about. You know, locking doors, not leaving valuables on the front seat of your car if it's parked out on the street, those kind of things are going to matter a lot as well.
I've put up a slide again from day one about personal safety, but Anna, as someone who's lived in the neighborhood for nearly 3 years, now granted you could probably outrun anybody as a collegiate athlete, but could you talk about, you know, especially as a woman moving around this neighborhood at night and protection of your own home, just how you've kept yourself safe?
Yeah, I know carrying pepper spray, that's a big thing, which might seem scary to use, but you never know when you're going to use it. Since I do live farther away from campus, I drive. So making sure, say, if you're walking home, if you're in that 6-block radius, to really use the public safety's walking escort program, which I think a lot of people don't know about. Or say if you live a little farther away and you still walk, to call someone on your walk home, just so there's someone, you're talking to someone like right there in case something does happen. I know, say, also when I drive, even when I get in the parking ramp at St. Thomas, I lock my car right away, even if I just sit there for 5 more minutes. And then when I'm home, making sure lock the doors when I'm home, obviously lock them when I'm not. Yeah, and if you're going to be gone, I think I mentioned this in the PowerPoint, if you're going to be gone, like let your neighbors know that you're going to be, say, home for Christmas break or whatever, and then they can watch over your house. One of the things Amy told me that's like stuck with me, that it's easy to tell when students aren't home, especially during the winter months, if your sidewalk isn't shoveled. So making sure to let your neighbors know if you're going to be gone for a while, and then communicating with your roommate, say, oh, I'm going to be at the library until like 11. This is where I'm going to be. So.
And when you move in, if you don't know a neighbor, and if it feels intimidating to go to someone's door, and I can understand that, reach out to me. I can almost guarantee that I know someone on your block and can reach out to that person and help kind of partner you with a homeowner. We have a couple of questions, and thank you for these. Going back to inspections, this is Morgan. If an inspector comes to the house and we were not notified ahead of time, do we still have to let them in? Or how do we check that they are telling the truth for safety? What a good question. Who'd like to jump in?
Well, on the safety question, you could contact the city and say, hey, somebody that claims to be an inspector is here. This is what they say their name is. Are they an inspector? Should I let them in? They have a business card, but so what? And they could confirm that it's actually somebody that works for the city. The question about whether you have to let them in or not is actually something that has gone to the state Supreme Court at least twice in the last 15 years in different parts of the state. The short answer is you probably do have to let them in. Maybe not that day, but you will have to let them in eventually. Just so you understand what inspectors are doing when they come in, they aren't the police. They're not really there to look for drugs, for instance. They're there to see if the walls are going to fall over, or if the furnace filter's ever been changed, to make sure the place isn't going to burn down. That's really why they're there. They're not going to be going through your drawers to look for incriminating evidence of something. They're really looking for structural issues. They're going to count beds. I guarantee you they're going to count beds, which Anna can confirm. That's what they do to make sure that there aren't 6 or 8 people living in a place where there's supposed to be 4 people. So there you go.
Josh Kerner is a landlord. Now, I know you live in California now, but that's fairly recent. When you were living here and buying your properties, would you try to be present when a city inspector was coming? Is that something our students should ask of their landlord?
Yeah. Personally, I would try to be present just so the inspector doesn't spend, the entire hour looking at every single nook and cranny, because I can guarantee you in every home they're going to be able to find something. I'd also like to be there to answer any questions they have, if they're asking if I plan on doing more work to this or that or whatever. But all those initial inspections for getting the student rental license are, I guess, a little bit different than the inspections afterward when they're just coming and making sure that everything is squared away. So I think now if an inspection were to happen, I'd have somebody I know who's not a tenant be there just to be there. But that's pretty much as far as it would go. I'd just kind of let them do their job and let me know what's going on.
We have been getting great questions, and thank you. This is exactly what we were hoping for. We've had you here for an hour, and I'm guessing that folks might just want a quick little rest break or go grab a beverage or a bite to eat. So I am going to share a screen from, if we were in person, we would be asking you to take a look at this. You may not have your lease in front of you, but if you do, or if you can remember your lease, when we come back after a few minutes, would be curious to hear whether you found any special rules in your lease. This might be around subleasing. It might be around whether you can host a party. We had someone in STEP in February who had a clause about no Tommy Johnny parties in her lease. So let's just take a minute, and if you can lay your hands on your lease or come back and just share anything that was kind of over and above the usual that was in your lease. See you in just a minute. All right, we lost Josh Kerner there. Anna, maybe as people are coming back, can you answer this? Is there anything kind of unusual or over and above in your lease?
The only thing, I guess it's not really unusual, I guess it's pretty common, just no subleasers. So this is my second year here, so it's kind of unfortunate. I studied abroad for a whole semester in Australia, so not finding a subleaser and me still paying rent when I was still in Australia, that one was kind of a hit. But other than that, everything's pretty standard. I haven't really seen anything much about whether or not, like we were talking earlier about if you have guests, how long they can stay. But that's something I should look at.
We had someone answer, and thank you, Natalie. We need to be able to show proof of enrollment at St. Thomas before we move in. Mike or Josh, any notion why that would be?
I don't know.
Go ahead.
I don't know why it's there. I don't think there's any law against requiring it in a lease. Again, I advise college students all around the state in various geographical areas, and that's not a common lease requirement, but there's no law that says they can't do it. So if it's in the contract, you probably have to do it.
My gut would be is it's tied to the student housing overlay district, and that this landlord, I'm guessing it's a registered student rental, and in order to maintain your status as a registered student rental, you do need to continuously rent undergraduate students. And so Most people don't. I don't know how often the city is checking on that necessarily, but I am guessing that's a proactive landlord who's maintaining good records in case they're ever challenged in the city. That would be my gut. Without knowing the address, I can't know for sure that's probable, but that's my guess.
That's a very good point. Mike, before we move off this, anything else that you recommend students look for in their leases that, you know, we don't want them to get tripped up later?
Well, the subletting thing that Anna mentioned is certainly a common concern when people are traveling abroad, although I'm not really sure how much traveling abroad is going to happen in the next couple of years. Hard to know. Easiest way to make a sublet actually happen is before you sign the lease. If you know somebody that's going to be subletting for 3 months and you approach the landlord as sort of a package deal, I'm going to be your tenant for 9 months, but they're going to be the tenant for 3 months, and we want to have the background check done on all of them, is the most effective way to do that before you sign the lease, because that's when you can negotiate, is before you sign the contract, not after. It's much harder then.
Here's an interesting one from Audrey. We need to notify management if we will not be in the house longer than 7 days. Now, I'm guessing in the winter, that possibly could be concern about the thermostat being down too low and pipes freezing, but this is another one that I've not heard of. Seems like a good idea. Any thoughts on this?
Yep, I do. It's actually a misdemeanor in the winter if you leave your rental without telling the landlord that you've gone physically. Yeah, it's not a common one, but you're supposed to tell. I mean, it's really just for this. It's for frozen pipes, for tenants who will disappear for vacation, or they're going home over a break or something like that. It's actually the law that they have to tell the landlord that they're going to be gone for, I think it's 48 hours. No, I'm not sure. I'm finding the statute and I'll get it for you. This doesn't come up all that often, but when it does, it's because pipes froze and the landlord's coming after the tenant for the place not knowing that they were going to leave. And also the shoveling that you mentioned earlier, Amy, that the landlord might want to arrange for somebody else to shovel so there isn't a break-in while people are gone.
Mm-hmm. We have one from Anonymous saying no kegs are allowed in his lease, which I would take to mean, you know, I don't want this place overflowing with people. Okay.
As Josh just mentioned this about, or actually, sorry, it was Mike mentioned about before you sign the lease being the best time to negotiate. There's a question in the Q&A that's been sitting there for a while, and it was a great segue into this. We often talk about and sometimes work with folks who are going to live in the same property a second year, and communication with your landlord and how you would renew your lease. And one of the things that I like to remind students of is if you've been a good tenant, if you've been paying on time, haven't created problems, taking good care of the property, wanting to return to a property is your best time to negotiate with a landlord. As Mike said, before you even sign a lease in the first place is one place. But if you've demonstrated you're a good tenant and have a relationship with that landlord, that's a good relationship. That's a great time to see about renegotiating a lease. We've worked with students who have gotten rent reduced slightly. We've worked with students who use that as an opportunity to say, hey, can we get a pet and put in a little bigger security deposit? The value to a landlord of not having to seek out new good tenants every year is really high. The amount of time and effort that saves a landlord is worth something to many of them. And I'm saying that with Josh Kerner, knowing his tenants might be hearing me say that, right? And so I think that's a time, and I'd be willing to let any landlord hear that because that's just business and that's real. And I think a lot of landlords, they're not gonna drop your rent in half or anything. That's not good business. But maintaining good relationships with tenants and landlords that are working well together is always in everyone's best interest. And so just a note to think about that. If you're just entering a property for the first time here this June or July or August, I know that's a year away, but demonstrating good behavior and good relationships with your landlord now will serve you a year from now too, if you want to stay at that property.
Josh Kerner, any good stories about how your tenants have effectively negotiated with you?
Not necessarily. I learned from the last step that we have to pay tenants if they were to shovel the place, you know, if they're required to shovel in a lease. So Mike, can I require them that, can it be required they have to shovel in the lease but I have to pay them?
Yep. I mean, a landlord can require it in the lease. You have to shovel and mow, usually is the combo platter. But yeah, that landlord has to pay them, and it's got to be a fair price, and it has to be in writing too. It can be in the lease, but yeah, you can require it. Yes.
So that's really the only negotiation I've done is, you know, after learning that, letting my tenants know, hey, who wants $10, you know, to get out there and shovel the snow. But yeah, I totally agree with Josh. If you're a great tenant, it gives you a lot of leverage if you want to live in that home again.
Let's, this is a good segue into communicating with the landlord, and I'm going to share this screen again. We really emphasize, Josh Hengemule, I've heard you talk about this, and I wonder if you could jump in first. We really emphasize communicating in writing, but that can mean many things in this day and age. Can you say more about that?
Sure. I think communicating in writing, I often say text messages don't count just because it's really hard to validate authenticity and keep a good record of them. Mike could tell us stories of how they work in courts or not. You actually need to fight with your landlord about something. But it's probably not as easy or as good as email. Email with time and date stamps, with good records, those kind of things, certainly works as written communication. And I'll often say, even if you talk with your landlord or you text with your landlord, which sometimes that's the best way to make something happen quickly, it's really good to follow up with an email. And it could just be as, say, an email that says, hey, thanks for texting and saying you'll get that repair done in the next week. Really appreciate it, right? That's gratitude, which is always a good thing to show. And you have documentation that the landlord and you had some communication about a repair being done within. It's not perfect. Nothing's great. We often talk about even logging your communication with the landlord. And again, similar with insurance, think of this as insurance. The vast majority of students won't need a good written record. The vast majority of tenants don't need a really strong written record. But the students I've worked with over the years who wished they had it when problems emerged, or who dealt with problems for a short period of time without good written communication because they thought it would just get taken care of quickly, and then 3 months later really wish they had taken it more seriously and documented the first communications. It's high, and it really matters. And I've seen students, and I'm sure Mike has worked with students or tenants who have done good record keeping and had to work a little bit more confrontationally with their landlord, and had it pay dividends to them, and being able to get things accomplished.
Yeah, the big problem with texts is if you lose your phone or you break your phone or you get a new phone, the texts disappear. And having worked on court cases where people have tried to recover texts from an old phone from their phone company and knowing how incredibly hard it can be, emails are vastly superior, and courts prefer them in every regard when it comes to proving what was said by each party.
So Anna, before we move off this topic, we're seeing a screen share here of one way that you could document. Is this realistic in a busy student's life? I mean, how do you log communications with your landlord?
Honestly, this to me is not realistic, but I guess I haven't really had anything like major with my landlord where I would have to document it. Say it's something quick, a quick question, I usually text him. There was an incident where we had like mice in our house, so I called him quick about like getting some traps. But like with those, there hasn't been really anything to me where I would need to document it, or he hasn't shown signs of like, oh, I need to like the things we talk about, I need to document. So, but if like, say your landlord has been like, he doesn't communicate well, there are issues with your house, then I think the Excel document you showed, then that would be a good way to go. But for like my instance, my landlord and I haven't really had to track anything that he's been saying. So
I would say if you communicate with your landlord about a problem and it gets taken care of right away, that's showing that you maybe don't need to. But I would say, especially when your hair should trigger a little bit about maybe I should log this a little bit more or find a better way to write it down, is if you feel like you need to communicate a second, right? And not a second time in 2 days. I mean, you need to have some reasonableness about this. You're probably busy too, and understand that sometimes things can't be taken care of within hours. But if you've gone a week from a first communication and you feel like you need to reach out again, maybe that's a time to go back and both document the first see if you can recreate some documentation on the first communication and document the second. Again, not rushing to be antagonistic about this, but if you get 3-4 communications, 3-4 months down the road, it's going to be impossible to recreate. That's one way I would.
And I don't think all repair kind of problems are created equal on this question either. I mean, if we're talking about any kind of leak, I'd want to do something that I could prove later that I told the landlord about. If there's any kind of electrical concern, again, I'd want to have something where I could prove later that I told the landlord about it, so they can't blame me for not telling them that the problem existed.
And the counterpoint on that is you're telling the landlord about those things as well, right? Which is a good way to establish a good relationship. As Josh will tell you and did, the sooner you let a landlord know about something, the more likely they're going to be able to address it too.
We are getting close to the end of our time, and I want to do one more pitch for students to get their questions in, their concerns. Again, we so appreciate you being here, and we hope you're finding this valuable. I'm going to share the screen again. We're talking about, I realize we're focusing here a lot on problems with landlords. I deal with many, many folks who rent to our students, and I can tell you that the vast majority of them care about their properties. Most important, they care about our students. So, these are worst case scenarios that we're getting in front of you, but they are important. Anna, have you ever had to file a complaint as a neighborhood?
No, I haven't. So no, out of my 3 years, I haven't had to.
Mike or Josh Kerner, any thoughts on this topic?
Well, look, there's about 600,000 to 700,000 rentals in Minnesota, and there are about 18,000 to 20,000 court cases filed between landlords and tenants every year. Most landlords and tenants get along because they can figure out how to communicate with each other if there's a problem. So usually there's not a problem. And you shouldn't go into a landlord-tenant situation expecting there to be a confrontational fight. It shouldn't be your tone going in, because most of the time it isn't. And so give your landlord a chance to fix stuff by communicating politely and honestly with them when that first repair issue comes up.
Any other thoughts on this topic? I would like to just give each panelist a chance to, if you could leave our participants with one thought, what would that be?
I'll go first. Yeah, so I think one of the most important things to do is when you move into a place, if you have a printer, if you can go to the library, print off a little info sheet about yourselves. And what I mean by that is maybe your car's license plate numbers and your phone numbers, and go around to your immediate neighbors and knock on the door at some point that week and just say hi and give them that sheet. And it doesn't just change the relationship you might have with those neighbors down the road. It helps the reputation of that home specifically. So if the people who were living there before you weren't, the greatest and weren't the most conscientious, people might have that like, oh, all the people who live in this home, might be that same way. So you might not know what you're moving into when you're moving into that home. Go meet your neighbors, let them know who you are, foster that good relationship right away. And it does way more than just you're having a party and, they'll let you know. It totally helps the perception of the neighborhood, that block, it goes such a long ways.
Josh, I remember when you were a senior and you did this on Lincoln. And I know firsthand that some of the homeowners around you really appreciated it.
Yeah, and that was a situation in which we were moving into a home that had a certain reputation, and we didn't want that carrying, into
Mm-hmm.
the neighbor's perception of who we were. So you never know. Go meet them and be nice, and I'm sure they'll be nice back. And if they're not, you kind of know who to avoid in the future, or who to let know if you're having a party ahead of time in the future.
Mike, what would be your closing comments to our participants tonight?
Well, the world sucks right now, right? But I think most of the people watching right now are about to do one of the, not most exciting, but one of the most sort of liberating things and freedom steps of your life, to get your own first place. And that's a big deal, and it's a fun thing, and it should be something you're really looking forward to. It's not complete freedom. I mean, you're going to have you've already signed a whole set of rules that you've agreed to live up to, but it is your own first place. And it really is something that I know you'll remember, because everybody does remember their first rental. And it's something you should be hopefully not nervous about, fearful about, but really looking forward to, because most landlords and tenants get along just fine and get along fine with their roommates. And so hopefully it's that one ray of optimism in your life right now, with everything that we're all dealing with, is that you're going to get your first place soon.
Thank you. Josh, how about you? Josh Hinkemule.
Sure. Hard to follow that one. That's a great one. I would say it's helpful for students to remember the diversity of our neighborhood. It gets easy to walk around our neighborhood at 11 o'clock at night in the fall and think we're a college neighborhood. And yes, we have significantly more college students in our neighborhood than, a Twin Cities suburb does. That being said, we're not Dinkytown. We're not the neighborhoods around Penn State and those kind of, right? Like we are still a really community, family, residential neighborhood as well. And so if you lived on campus recently and your main idea of living where you go to college is Ireland Hall, where someone's playing Call of Duty until 4 a.m. on one side of you and the ROTC guy gets up at 5 a.m. on the other side of you, but you're all kind of sharing that same experience, it can be really easy to forget that when you move out into the neighborhood, you might have on one side of you a family with little kids who really don't want to hear F-bombs flying in the backyard at 2 in the afternoon. And on the other side, a nice couple that eats dinner at 4 p.m. and goes to bed at 6 p.m. And that's normal. That is their normal for their life and who they are. And so building off of what Josh talked about building those relationships is going to be really important, and giving a lot of grace to each other. Because one of the things Amy and I love to tell neighbors is to give our students grace as well for the lives they have and the lives they lead, and where there's a balance in that. But it gets really hard to deliver that message to our neighbors if the students aren't doing it back. And again, many do, most do. And it's really kind of wonderful. I think a lot of our students are really happy to live in a neighborhood like ours versus going over to Dinkytown and renting in that neighborhood or something like that, right? And so there's a little bit of responsibility that comes with that great positive as well.
We would have talked a lot more about the community and the neighborhood in day one, but one thing I want to make sure you know, I am a homeowner in this neighborhood, and I have heard many people at my age and stage of life say, we love the students. We love the energy of the students. You bring a kind of diversity that we like. I know a young couple where the man has said, I feel safer having my wife walk around here because this neighborhood is lively at night. So I want to make sure that you walk into this neighborhood knowing that the vast majority of us really do welcome you, and we're glad you're here. And we live in this neighborhood because we see value in what the colleges bring, St. Thomas, McAllister, and the others. Anna, what would your final words be?
I would say on a fun note, enjoy living with your friends. I mean, this kind of really, or for me, like the last time really living with my friends. So enjoy that for your 2-3 years. And then also be like responsible about it, but have fun. And then if you have any questions, like for sure reach out to the neighborhood student advisors. Like especially the ones that are returning next year. We're always here for if you have questions, just if you are dealing with a roommate issue, something simple like that. We're a resource to you. And also Amy, Josh, they're also resources to you as well. So don't be afraid to reach out, email, text, whatever.
I will just close by saying sincerely thank you for being part of this tonight and for experimenting with us in taking this online for the first time. I will get follow-up material to all of you. We'll get you contact information for me and Josh and OCSL and the NSAs who will be coming back. I'm very sorry that Anna won't be among them, but Anna, I want to thank you for your leadership this year, but especially tonight. You took on this assignment. This was not how we were expecting to do STEP, and I really thank you for all your work to make it a success.
Thank you. I want to thank all the panelists too for coming again. This was fun, and for all the attendees for spending an hour or so of your night with us. So hopefully this was informative to you guys, and Amy and I will discuss the gift cards and reach out to those who won those. But yeah, thank you everyone for coming.